What's up guys, welcome back to the Home Slice. I'm just shooting this video to encapsulate a large body of testing that I did and to notify you guys that I'm moving to just a slightly different model in my testing, and I'm going to explain just some of the reasons why for that. I'm not going to make any guarantees that this video will be short, so if you're a nerd, buckle up. If you're not a nerd, this may not be the video for you, but I'm happy if you're here. So following up on the testing that I did, I have been testing with a big, thick 40mm manila rope, sharpening Victorinox knives because they have simple steel to see which sharpening stones seem to produce the best results, and then taking some of those good performing stones and matching them up together to where I sharpen one side of the edge with a fine stone, or one stone, and the other side of the edge with a coarse stone, or at least a different stone, and creating edges that have these two grit ratings and characteristics coming together at the apex. This is sort of the research that I've been doing. Well, I've finished up testing all the stones that I have, and I've selected which ones seem to work best in a dual grit edge, two-sided edge, on simple steel. So my next question has been, how do different steels affect the sharpening characteristics, and do those edges that worked really amazing and stropping protocols and the things that I developed on those Victorinox knives that worked very, very well, do they hold true on different kinds of steel, or do you need to adjust your technique to pull the best out of different kinds of blade steel? Well, I had a donor back when I was filming all of this stuff that needed his knives. I wanted to get his knives back to, and I had a knife in H1, which is a very low carbon and nitrogen steel, and a knife in Venev, both from him, which is a very high nitrogen and high carbon, high alloy steel, powder steel, really nice steel. So I figured, hey, maybe I should test these two different steels to see what I can observe. If I can observe what works well on a really low sort of hardness, low carbon or nitrogen kind of steel, and that really high one, then maybe I can put in some other steels to fill in the blanks between those, and then put in some other steels to fill in the blanks between those, and we can find the threshold where we switch from where one sharpening protocol is sort of helpful through a certain range of steels, and then maybe it changes to something else, and maybe even a third. So what actually happened was H1 and Venev being very unusual steels, and H1 even being like austenitic and just a very, very different sort of atomic structure in that steel, they produced some really strange and confusing results, which sent me on this big journey. So with H1, I got nearly the same number. The dual grit edge did one more cut of the Andy rope than the corresponding fine edge. And I tried some different things to try to figure out why that was, but I couldn't get any sort of different results out of it. Currently, my theory, I guess, my guess is that because H1 has quite high edge stability but low wear resistance, the fine edge did particularly well because of the fine edge stability, and the dual grit edge was worn away more quickly than on other steels, or bent over more quickly than it would on other steels. That's my current sort of prevailing train of thought, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Though I did notice that even though it only cut one more time, the dual grit edge on the H1 was much, much, much more aggressive, and for me it was more pleasing to use. So that was really interesting. Then I got to Venev, and I really like to push against convention, so I tried just sharpening Venev the way that I sharpened MagnaCut, and I've sharpened a whole bunch of steels, which includes a traditional waterstone, well, at least a Suhiro Serax waterstone on one side, and then was stropped also with an aluminum-based stropping compound, which was Mother's Mag, on a compressible strop, which was denim. That's what I used. And the dual grit edge did significantly worse than the fine edge, but even the fine edge was sort of relatively on par using those aluminum-based stones with the results that I got from H1. And I was like, man, Venev, by all accounts, ought to have much, much better wear resistance and much better edge retention than H1 does. So I started a stropping series. I wanted to figure out which ways to clean up the edge and which stones should I use to get the best results out of Vanex. And I had planned to air every single one of these as an individual episode, but oh my goodness, it's just got completely unwieldy. Like the stropping series is like 10 videos long, and if I do all the editing load on that, then I'm just going to be buried under editing work when I already kind of have the results. And I also tried several different Andy tests for Vanex and H1, and I think that the conclusion that I will go over in this video a summary of the highlights of the stropping data, because it was a huge set of tests and it was really, really interesting to me and very revealing. But before I get into that, I think that what I've realized is that I need to switch some things up in my content. And so one thing that I realized when I do a set of 30 different stropping tests and I end up with a sheet of paper that's just plastered with numbers like this, but there's no way to sort it and very few ways to make sense of it or fit it into my mind, is that I've got to go digital. I've got to get everything on Google Sheets where I can resort things and just really see the patterns more clearly and synthesize the data. I haven't done that with these tests because I'm doing this video after looking it over very thoroughly. But in other video series that I'm filming now, I am putting everything directly into the computer so that I can sort it out easier in my mind. Another thing that I've realized is that I probably am at a point where I'm not going to shoot each individual test as an individual video. Instead, I think I'm going to start grouping things either by similar steels or by one steel and shoot the best dual grit edge and the best fine edge, and then do a video comparing the two in one video so that I can cut down on my editing load and just move through this research and just hopefully find out more things that are beneficial more quickly, with it being less cumbersome on the editing side of things. Another thing that I have realized is that the testing that I was doing, it was really cool and fun to push them through the slicing rig and hammer things into pine with the 2 kg weight. But after doing a more thorough impact test, which I'll produce sometime in the next few weeks and get edited and produced, I realized that the impact stability actually comes from how much you clean up the edge and how much you strop it. It doesn't depend as much on whether it's a fine edge or a dual grit edge. And I've got a Victorinox test coming out, like I said, where I'll sort of explain my reasoning in that, but I'm not feeling as much of the need to impact test every single edge. Now that we've observed the differences between the different stones, I feel pretty confident that I know that further cleaning up the edge with a strop is going to drop a little bit the amount of rope cuts that it would do, but increase its impact stability, and that comes mainly from the amount of stropping and cleanup, and your best number is a pretty good indicator of that, a low best number. But it doesn't necessarily inherently come from a certain stone. And with steels it will be different, but I think it will come from the toughness rating of that steel more so than anything. I've also found that I can usually feel how aggressive an edge is or feel how easily it goes through the manila rope. And so the aggression testing that I was doing, the slicing force analysis, was really interesting to me on the Victorinox knives, but I think I'm going to simplify the impact test and the aggression test out of the testing for now, because I'm finding they're adequately covered by other things that I am observing, and just do the rope cut tests and the microscope stuff and compare two different edges in one video in a simplified way. Another thing is sort of a broad strokes thing that I've realized is that though I love to throw off convention, that you really do need diamond and CBN abrasives on these steels with as much nitrogen or carbon and as much carbide content as Vanex has. I simply could not get the edge fully cleaned up and crisp and durable in a fine edge or a dual grit edge without taking that steel, which is rich in vanadium, and making sure that all the way through the progression, I am sharpening it with just diamond and CBN. So I couldn't get under 100 best very easily with that, or at all with stones. And if I did all diamond stones, the only stropping material that I was able to get under 100 best with on Vanex steel was pure chromium oxide, which I don't know what the hardness level of that is, but it was the only thing that was kind of close enough to the diamond and CBN in its cutting action to clean up the edge to under 100 best. None of the other abrasives really worked. So that's a thing that as an admission that I'm having to make, where I have wanted to believe that you can just get cheaper abrasives and they'll work on everything good enough. That's not the case. This is me going on the record saying y'all are right, and I gotta listen to some conventions, I guess. Anyway, in summary of what's changing in my videos, we're gonna simplify to just the 40mm manila rope test. In these next few steels coming out, that is H1, LC200N, 12C27, and Vanex, I'm going to weed out the tests that didn't go well, and I'll tell you in the video what I learned from them, and I'll just present the best fine edge versus the best dual grit edge and present that for your analysis in each of those. So doing one video per steel. And after that, I'm going to probably go to this model that I'm kind of excited about, where I pit one steel against another steel, and the steels have something in common or some similarity, but I'll test two steels against each other fine, and then the same two steels will come and face off against each other in a dual grit edge test. So for instance, one of my first tests will be 154 cm versus CPM 154, because they're the same alloy composition, but I'd like to see if they respond differently because of the different size of carbides to a dual grit edge, and if one of them benefits from dual grit more than the other. So that's how things are changing. Each of the steels will have a similarity and a difference, which I'll explain, and we'll try to learn through comparing the different aspects of different steels. I'll cut out the tests where I realized that something wasn't operating correctly or effectively, and I'll just notify you of that rather than you having to watch a whole video about it. Anyway, on to the results of the stropping test. So this, sort of rat's nest kind of table of things is 30 different stropping tests that I did. I tested a whole bunch of different mediums, including MDF, cardboard, single ply cardboard, aluminum rod, some 3M medical tape, fabric tape that is, cardstock, leather, micarta, linen micarta, denim, basswood, lapping film, a whole bunch of different stropping mediums. And I tested a whole bunch of different abrasives, that is including Mother's Mag, as well as CBN and Diamond from Venev, and Stroppy stuff, and Gunny juice, in sizes ranging from 0.1 micron up to 11 microns, and just did a whole bunch of different tests. Oh my goodness. The first finding that I found is that I'm actually a novice at stropping. I have a sharpening method, dual grit, which I believed up until recently, this experience with Vanex, that it benefited only from minimal stropping so that you could save the aggression on it. Therefore, I have shied away from stropping, and I'm just finding like I have a whole lot to learn. For instance, through this test I found, because I would do 90 inches of strop travel, so I would do like 15 strokes per side on a 6-inch strop, and so that would be 90 inches in each direction of travel, and then I would do another 10 strokes and then another 5 strokes, and I would test at each one. And I found very often I would complete my first 15 strokes and the number would not have changed that much, especially on non-compressible mediums like basswood or something like that. And when I would try to lift the knife just a tiny, tiny amount from where I would naturally rest it, the number would drop very quickly down toward closer to 100. And what I realized through this process is that I'm so used to stropping on denim, and denim is compressible, and so it wraps around the edge, that I've sort of got my muscle memory trained to bring the best out of a denim strop. But because of that, I compensate mentally, without even thinking about it, to dropping that angle just a tiny bit to stay off of hitting that apex too harshly and rounding the edge. But because my muscle memory is trained to that, to do basswood and to do diamond abrasive, I'm actually having to lift the knife a little bit more to make sure I hit that apex, because mentally I want to adjust it the other way automatically. Another thing that I noticed through all of this stropping research is that leather has an effect where it's a tiny bit compressible, and because of that, it wraps around and touches that apex more quickly, and you'll see the number drop often a little bit more quickly, in my experience with Vanex, than some of the other stropping materials. But because it has that tiny bit of compression to it, it has a bit of a reversing returns effect where it drops significantly down from wherever you started. Maybe you started at 150, or maybe you started at 130 best, and then it drops down to a better number. But you get to a certain number of strokes, and usually it's at or around 30 in my testing of Vanex, where the number starts to come back up and actually get worse because you've removed the burr, but now you're beginning to round things over because of that compression effect. I've noticed it's not as present in stropping mediums like basswood or things like that. I bought some basswood from the hardware store, sanded it with some 800 grit sandpaper per the recommendations of Max over at Stroppy Stuff, and prepared it that way. And I noticed that the trajectory was primarily a down or a plateau effect with the wood products, because they didn't compress and they didn't have as much of that rounding effect. A really interesting thing that absolutely boggled and blew my mind was that you can use micarta as a strop. I actually got one of my best results, an 87 gram best reading, off of linen micarta, which was also sanded with 800 grit silicon carbide sandpaper to prepare it, and loaded with 0.1 micron gunny juice. The edge had to be pretty clean, and the abrasive had to be a pretty teeny tiny micron for the micarta to work, but I really freaked out in the video, and you won't see it because I'm doing this summary video, but I freaked out when that happened. Probably the main discovery that I made is that Stroppy Stuff is the best diamond abrasive I have ever used. I have one Gunny Juice product, and it seems like it's on par, but when I switched from the Venevs and the other brands of emulsions to the Stroppy Stuff, it was like I could hear the abrasives raking across the edge. It sounded like I was using a sharpening stone, and the numbers fell so quickly to so much lower than I experienced with the other products. The concentration and the separations of the diamonds in the Stroppy Stuff compound absolutely blew my mind. For my high carbon, high carbide volume steels, high vanadium steels, I'm using almost exclusively Stroppy Stuff now, because Max was generous enough to send me a sampling of his product, and it is mind-blowingly good. So if you guys haven't checked out Stroppy Stuff, I'd really encourage you to. Again, I was blown away by the results of that. The best mediums that I experienced, by far the most versatile ones, were stiff flat leather or basswood. That sort of follows conventional wisdom, I realize, but I have to try everything because I'm Gabe. The best abrasives that I experienced that got the best numbers were Stroppy Stuff at 1 micron and 0.25 micron, and Gunny Juice at 0.1 micron. I also got really good results from pure chromium oxide, but it takes a little bit of work to locate and make that, and I use that mainly on leather. It also got quite good results on Vanex, but maybe not quite the same level of crispness and bite in the edge, but a very clean edge with the chromium oxide. And I even had some good results with mixing the chromium oxide with the diamond abrasives to sort of like have something that wears on the steel matrix and something that wears on the carbides and deburrs with the power of both of those abrasives. So feel free to play around with that. The best numbers I got during this test with my stropping skill, just beginning to grow and where it's at now, and my apexing precision that I have right now, were all in the 82 grams to 99 grams best range. Those were all my best results. I've highlighted them on here. 98 grams chromium oxide and gunny juice. 96 with just chromium oxide, so very similar results there. 99 with stroppy stuff on basswood, 0.25 micron, and 88 on leather, so a little bit better number on leather. The gunny juice took it down sometimes to an even better number, like 82 or 87 on micarta and leather respectively, or a 93 gram on basswood. But yeah, definitely the 1 micron stroppy stuff worked really good for approaching that like 100 grams best mark. The 0.25 micron was incredible for getting it under the 100 best mark, and the basswood was really good for making sure that number doesn't go back up. So that's my input on that at the moment. Another thing that I realized, that I tried to do dual grit stropping. I did it on some Victorinox knives, and I also tried to do it on Vanex, and in all cases, sometimes I would try to use the coarse stropping substance on the coarse side of the edge and the fine on the fine, and then I flipped it and I did the fine strop on the coarse side and the coarse strop on the fine side to see if I could combine the deburring characteristics. And what I find overwhelmingly is that the numbers didn't improve much beyond this like 160 best sort of plateau. And when I went to do rope cut tests, which I did with the Victorinox, it cut 3 times, which is not a horrible result, but it's nowhere near the 12-13 I was getting from the Mother's Mag and from the just normal dual grit edge. And on the Vanex, it was not an improvement when I did the dual stropping. In fact, it took the edge retention down slightly, and the aggression disappeared rather quickly. I would look at it in the microscope, and these dual stropped edges would look really nice, like they had tons of texture, but I would get through a bit of rope with them, and I could feel that they were like kind of bending over, and you just lose the aggression straight away. So something about having the same type of abrasive applied to both sides, moving that little bit of burr back and forth, removes it, it would seem, a little bit better. And the benefit that you get from dual grit sharpening on 2 different stones seems to be somewhat nullified if you take it into the world of stropping, because the goal of stropping is not apparently that creation of extra aggression, but it is the cleaning up of that edge, whether aggressive or fine. That's my opinion at this moment based on this research. I don't know everything about it. If you've got input, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but I've not experienced that dual grit stropping really works. I also experienced that coarse stropping, like above around 10 microns, seemed not to be helpful on the Victorinox or on the Vanex steel. I know there's some people who have made custom emulsions that are for deburring, like specifically for deburring really difficult malleable steel, and they're set up in a larger range. But I found that for these 2 steels and for a lot of the dual grit edges that I tinkered with, coarse stropping is not very effective. You kind of want to get most of your work done on the stones and then just clean it up. And the same abrasive on both sides, and that sort of like 1 micron and then some on the submicron level seems to work better for me than the larger abrasives did. The last thing that I realized that was a surprise to me is that in a dual grit edge, Vanex responds surprisingly well for me to a full stropping. My best dual grit result, I did 30 strokes on each side of the dual grit edge and then tested it, and it still had heaps of aggression. So I think for some of these higher carbide steels, higher carbon nitrogen steels, instead of the stropping on flat denim and Mother's Mag that I've been doing for the lower carbon steels, which you kind of want to stop at a certain point because you can begin to remove the texture from the edge and begin to round the edge over because that denim is compressible. you can actually get away with a lot more stropping strokes if you keep your abrasives of high quality and small, and you prepare the edge in a beneficial way beforehand. Those are my findings so far. In the next few weeks, I'll come out with that impact test and my first of my redone steel tests in the new format. But thank you for listening in. I hope that was interesting to most of you guys. And for now, I will just say peace out from the home slice. Take care. Bye.